Welcome back. And we took a short break after that enchanting presentation from Dr. Swangal Lee. And now we have an extraordinary person on board here on the TIM ship. And welcome Jonathan Kempe, right from coming to us from Australia. A fantastic part of TIM 2021 conference is, although it was one of the most challenging things we faced was to make the agenda because we had to keep 7 time zones in mind. And people are joining in from Australia and from Canada, from Florida, US, and Far East, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan. So it's very interesting. The one of the most important thing is sharing of ideas, sharing of knowledge. And in my welcome speech, people who heard me, we in Naval Connection believe in diversity, but diversity goes much beyond genders. It is diversity of skills, knowledge, sharing of ideas, and it's amazing that to have experts with us like Jonathan. Jonathan is one of the most young and dynamic maritime professionals I have met. And we've had a few sessions, chatting sessions before. And believe me, this is one of the most interesting sessions you will see today and in technology in maritime, where Jonathan is going to talk about internet connectivity. And his topic is, as I read it, is evolving maritime connectivity over the next 10 years. So lots and lots of interesting things today, and we will know about and seafarer specific or what internet connectivity is going to look like in the next 10 years on board ships. So before I hand over Jonathan to all of you, there's no presentation as such here, and just a one-on-one chat with Jonathan. And before I hand over Jonathan to all of you, I would want you to know Jonathan's skills and where he's coming from. Can we have Jonathan's introduction played, please?
Jonathan Kempe, founder and CEO, Verifai, Sydney, Australia. Jonathan is a technical founder with over 20 years of experience as a systems administrator across a broad array of disciplines. He has held a number of diverse roles, senior positions in large corporations, founding several businesses, holding trusted roles in nationally accredited NFPs, NGOs, and education providers, and in the Australian Defence Force satellite communications sector. Well connected to an array of Australian business advocacy groups, government bodies, and startups, Jonathan regularly contributes to innovation and industry forums in the areas of IoT, biometrics, the protection of critical infrastructure, and supply chains. He is a cybersecurity ambassador with the New South Wales Cybersecurity Innovation Node, certified in cybersecurity through Lloyd's Maritime Academy. Is the host of Let's Talk Supply Chain Asia Pacific podcast, and was recently appointed to the We Care Academy's globally recognized supply chain focused education and research practitioners board. Jonathan is founder and CEO of Sydney-based company Verifai. Verifai has a focus on increasing supply chain security, transparency, and visibility through the deployment of unique technologies that generate trustworthy data, provide provenance assurance, and protect assets at rest and in transit. Passionate about solving global problems and working alongside creative entrepreneurs, Jonathan is dedicated to building real solutions that positively transform the world. The Naval Connection proudly presents Mr. Jonathan Kempe as a speaker at the Technology in Maritime TIM 2021 Global Virtual Conference.
Wow, Jonathan, welcome to TIM Conference 2021. Glad to have you with us. Two very interesting things I sort of heard in your introduction. One is that Verifai, very interesting name you have. Why? And the other thing is that global problems. And very few of us want to actually, we are more interested in the things outside our door rather than what's happening globally. But you have taken up to yourself to solve global problems. So I'll come back to that later. But to start with, why it's a very interesting name, Verifai. And when I sort of heard the name first, without checking your spelling, I just thought it was Verify. So why Verifai, Jonathan?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here. And I know there's many people listening from across the world. I'm just grateful to be a part of your community, to meet you. We've had some great chats, and to subsequently be able to dialogue with your community. So thanks so much for the invite to start with. Verifai, it's an interesting name. I mean, we sneakily kind of put AI at the end there just to tip our hat towards what we know is coming, which is artificial intelligence, which is changing a whole bunch of different things, in particular about how data gets handled. And for us, though, Verifai and to verify something is very important. So the act of verification, and that happens in lots of different domains. We're talking about at the moment in maritime. We talk about it in cybersecurity. We talk about in a phrase you might have heard, which is trust but verify. We sneakily put our name into that as well. But really what we're trying to ascertain as we communicate that with our name is, are the things that I'm dealing with the real things that are in front of me? Or have I been led to believe something that didn't really exist? Am I ill-informed, misinformed, or just uninformed? And I've got a particular interest in peeling back some of those layers, which is why the name, I think, is especially relevant.
Yeah, very good. Very interesting. And I also find it very interesting you mentioned about tipping your hat. And that brings me to my next question. One of your specialities has been HAT hat. And I want to invite the ears of all those people who are hearing me right now and hearing Jonathan Kempe right now. So here's Jonathan explaining what HAT means. Jonathan, if you can give us, and I think it's very interesting the way you put it about what it's going to be, how it's linked to connectivity. HAT, yeah. Jonathan?
HAT, yeah. So I just coined this little acronym, and I'll explain why at the end, but just HAT, H stands for hyperconnectivity. And my bold statement about hyperconnectivity is that in the next 10 years, it will become impossible to hide. And I'll unpack that in a second. A stands for accountability. And my statement about that is that the hyper-conscious consumer, who is driven by both sustainable objectives and ethical concerns, will accelerate accountability. And thirdly is transformation. And particularly, and I think it's very relevant for your audience, the role and regard for seafarers and maritime professionals will fundamentally change. And I think there's quite a few reasons for that. So H for hyperconnectivity, A for accountability, and T for transformation. I think all of these topics will be quite relevant to your audience. Do you want me to pick on any one of them to start? Perhaps we start at the H.
Yeah, I remember you were showing me some, last time we met, you showed me something very interesting on real time connected to hyperconnectivity. So if you could just share it with the audience, I think they'll find it immensely interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yes.
This is it right here. This is our big blue globe. And what you're seeing on the screen right now, if you can see it streamed through your the service that you've got in front of you, you'll notice I'm just rotating the globe around. You'll see all these green little squares and shapes sit above the Earth. This is the low Earth orbit layer of space. It's quite close in. It's regarded as less than 2,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And I can zoom in here just to see what some of these objects are. I can go, for instance, to Australia. I can see them running around at speed. I might just slow it down a bit so it's a bit closer to near real time. This low Earth orbit layer of space is being propagated at speed by a number of different suppliers the world over. There's a significant amount of them. You can see every now and then you'll spot a little line of satellites that look like this. They're kind of like in a little train. And these are the ones from Starlink. So Elon Musk's company.
So just to interrupt you, I'm trying to understand. It's so interesting. This looks like you're watching this on the microscope. It looks like those, I mean, I hate to say virus, but yeah. So are these satellites? You mean these are satellites?
Yeah, so these are objects that are tracked at the low Earth orbit layer, and they have lots of, they use a lot of different names in satellite technologies. They call them, sometimes they call them CubeSats or nanosats. They're generally smaller satellites that have been put up there in large volume. And the reason that has happened is that satellite technology over the years, which used to be the domain of ultra specialists who had long years of experience, they would put a satellite up in the sky. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars to maintain it, put it up there and so on. Now the cost of all that has become so democratized that even small companies can shoot little satellites just like this into orbit around the Earth in great volume. And so what you're seeing is the world over, a number of different suppliers, I've named a few already, there's a few here in Australia, are putting satellites up into the sky. And when you look at this, and this is what I want to just challenge your audience with, just to think about as we sort of rotate around this globe, what this will mean, it will fundamentally shift at this layer and the layers that are above them, the MEO layer, the Middle Earth orbit layer, and the GEO layer. It'll fundamentally change how connectivity works in the next 10 years. So over the next 10 years, you'll see a number of these players consolidate. The numbers that are up there at the moment will start to, they'll have to work together in tighter collaborations just so they can become profitable or maintain profitability. But it will fundamentally change how connectivity works. So if we were able to zoom in all the way down into the actual sea itself, and we thought, and maybe people know about the Service Marine Traffic, Tanker Tracker or so on, those services which show us what's happening on the sea, or connectivity that gets piped from the sea to the land, you can just imagine that this layer sits over the top of it, providing unprecedented connectivity underneath to the maritime layer. And so my thesis for this is that over the next 10 years, which includes a massive period of consolidation, you're fundamentally going to see a huge shift in both bandwidth, so high bandwidth applications, plus lower latency applications being made available all over the world.
So Jonathan, again, stay on this slide, please. It's very interesting. It's I noticed when you zoomed in, I mean, whatever you call it, satellites or geostats, I saw the concentration increase as we approach land. So there's more satellites over land than are there on the water. Am I interpreting it in the right way?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point. And what you see here is connectivity that may come to pass. And I use the word may, I'd like to say it will. But the reason why it has to obviously go over sea and land is that they operate in rotation, a lot of these satellites. Some of them are stationary, but most of them are orbiting the Earth. Sometimes they're synchronous to how the Earth rotates. But you make a really good point, because whether they're over the sea or over the land, the suppliers at this level have to ensure they have to maintain some degree of profitability. Obviously, they need to pay for all of this equipment and monitor equipment and so on. And so what they generally will try and do at this layer is to target dense areas that are highly populated so they can sell a significant amount of services. But the sea is not really highly populated. If you've got a tanker or some sort of large ship that's making its way across the ocean, it doesn't have a huge amount of people on it. It might have some services available that you can pipe to it. And so the question is going to become for maritime professionals, as this sort of layer changes the dynamic inside space, is how can they capture services at this layer to reduce the cost and increase the services available to maritime professionals? And that's going to be a really interesting thing that will happen over the next 10 years. I've heard discussions with some pretty big companies who are up the upper reaches, who traditionally have control over these sorts of things happening down into the maritime layer. And they're really starting to reconsider and evolve their service offerings. So I think the next 10 years will be really fascinating. And I think the LEO layer will initiate a huge amount of change across the next 10 years.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you right, so you mean to say over the next 10 years, the cost of internet connectivity will highly reduce, especially so if that does, then we're going to see a lot of sea change in the way internet connectivity is presently used on board ships.
Yeah, I would boldly say that if the LEO layer, with the collaboration and consolidation that happens, actually works and plays itself out in a way that we predict, we should start to see that the costs, and this is what we would hope would be the case, the cost of someone who's operating through a satellite-based technology, either to the LEO layer, the MEO layer, or to that GEO layer where they've had to change their cost structures to accommodate some of the competitors that have now entered the space. I imagine, it's a pretty bold prediction, but I imagine the cost will come down to be comparable to a mobile phone plan you might have on land in your home country. I think it's actually possible. That's
really transformational.
Yeah, that would be really transformational. And I want people to think about this, not just in terms of the connectivity that goes to the vessel. Like, we've got connectivity to the vessel, which helps it position itself in the world, and that's evolving and changing from AAS all the way up through different types of technology. But the transformational change that I see will be for the people on board the vessel, because they'll have access now to services that they never thought were even possible. I'm not just talking about texting home or FaceTime to home or those sorts of things. I'd like people to envisage that the transformation that occurs here will actually usher in the chance for any seaborne vessel to not just be something that lumbers along, that has long periods of inactivity, but it can actually turn into what would amount to a floating university, where people on board that vessel can get trained in real time, they can connect to land for welfare services, they can actually improve their own education and have connectivity to their loved ones, all facilitated through some of these changes at the satellite level.
Listen, Jonathan, we already started getting questions from the platform. This is so bloody interesting, you know. And moreover, you know, this the way Elon Musk makes all this money? I mean, I see Elon Musk's name written down all the geosats. Is this what he does?
Yeah. Well, I mean, interestingly, he just came out last week, and I think he said he needed $30 billion in order to maintain these satellites. Here's just a Starlink one that's just rotating around. The ones that you can see on screen there, they're on a just those little rectangles. They're all the ones in his constellation, the Starlink constellations. But he'll need a significant amount of money in order to maintain the network. And I can see that happening in a few ways. Direct connectivity will be one. But if we look at both accountability, which is the next letter, HAT, and then T for transformation, the services that get provided through this connectivity are going to be really important. Under accountability, for instance, and I mentioned ethical consumption, because people will be more aware of what's happening, and this is what satellites will generally do. They'll give us more awareness. So I could name a number of different startups like Vake or Satellytics, a whole bunch of different companies that are taking information from this layer and doing detection, high-res imaging. They're looking at emissions or pollution or theft or asset damage. They're using this technology to transform the appearance that we have, or the visuals that we have of what is happening in other areas that used to be very opaque. So say, for instance, and that's why I said right at the front of the presentation, in the next 10 years, it'll be impossible to hide. You're going to see accountability increase simply because there's more eyes on different targets all around the world. And so if a consumer is ethical or has a sustainable bent, they'll likely want to see what their shipment was. Let's say if it was inside a supply chain, they'll want to make sure that it did adhere to all of the standards that are currently being promoted about lower emission shipments, or reduction in CO2 or less pollution or so on. And then this technology layer will allow that accountability to happen. So you start to see business models change as people, some of them will start to virtue signal, but people will actually try and change their supply chains, the logistics efforts, the way in which they transport things through logistics networks, because they know there's going to be eyes on all of those things. The connectivity is going to usher in a new degree of accountability that I don't think we've seen before.
I'm just trying to absorb all the information that you're giving me and the relevance and huge relevance that it has on shipping. Jonathan, yesterday we had a very, very nice presentation from somebody called Arel Sil, and he was showing me some hardware on screen where they're into search and rescue, and they use satellites from clouds and cloud-based. So is this linked to, because they made their own system, so that they put their own wireless communication methods on board, and they enable the tracking of the people on board. So it's, if the vessel is inside an accident or incident, people can be tracking. So is this, all these systems and all using the same geostats? Is this linked in some way or the other?
Yeah, it's absolutely linked. And what you'll see, and the presentation yesterday was very illuminating, and we would have seen a lot of.
Oh, you saw that, right?
Yeah. And so onboard connectivity allows us to do things like do more intelligent container monitoring. So that's something that's of interest to Verifai. Can we have visibility when there was no visibility before? Can we have systems on board a vessel where if someone does fall overboard, they've got something attached to them inside one of their suits, which allows them to be located even if they drift away from the vessel? There's a whole bunch of things that connectivity and communications technology at this layer does. It fundamentally transforms how a ship operates. An example that we've started playing with is we use augmented reality, which gives you a picture in front of your eye that doesn't really exist. You can only see it in front of you. And we use a communication headset that can be connected to a wireless network on a vessel. And over the length of the vessel, let's say it's a couple of 100 meters, someone can be working on something complicated, pipe it back to the tower so that the expert in the tower can direct what they're doing. And if you've got a local network that's also connected by broadband to an external third party, you fundamentally change how something like maintenance occurs on board a vessel. You can fundamentally shift how safety occurs on board a vessel. You can really change a lot of these things as soon as you start improving connectivity. And that's what we heard from that speaker yesterday.
But you know, the way you're telling me right now, I mean, it's going to change everything, that the way everything is done on board. But even then, it takes time to move an elephant. I mean, of course, the maritime industry is very slow in its movement. Of course, rightly so. Maybe it's because it's huge and it has such a huge impact on our economy. So with this fast changing communications infrastructure and strategies, what is the time that things change on board, actually, practically speaking?
Actually and practically, and it's, I mean, you make a really good point. And what I've heard from you as we've chatted before is a strong advocacy for that change, one, to happen,
Yes.
but also to happen in a way which is actually transformational, which is the T of HAT. So what I would desire, and I know another number of other professionals who look at the, say, maritime supply chains or maritime supply chain professionals, and what they would desire is that real change would happen, not just talk, not just empty words, not just virtue signaling, greenwashing, whatever it might be. That actual transformation would occur. I think this is possible. We're starting to see a real emergence of advocacy at all levels, all the way up to the IMO. And I know you had Gillian Carson-Jackson on. She's an example of an amazing advocate. Maria Dixon online, Eric DeWicki. There's a bunch of folk who are really trumpeting the cause of maritime professionals and seafarers to say, let's bring about real change. I think if we put all those three things together, we can see over the next decade that real change will accelerate and occur. It's inevitable. If you've got hyperconnectivity, which brings accountability, then transformation is going to occur. And I think if you can stack those all three things together and you can use connectivity as the conduit for change, I think it will be transformational. We'll actually see this happen. We've started a discussion with one of the world's largest suppliers of satellite connectivity. And we are so encouraged with what they've done. In fact, just recently, I won't name them, but just recently they released a publication which was mind-blowing. It basically laid out exactly what needs to happen in the maritime environment and across supply chains in order for us to really get a handle on some of these things. And when I read it, I thought, this is exactly what needs to happen. We need to have those people who aren't just brand advocates, but bring real skill to the domain.
Yeah, and Jonathan,
that's why
I'm sorry for apologize for interrupting you. Being a seafarer myself, and I take the privilege of speaking with thousands of seafarers who are hearing this. We already have too many things and too many data and too many research into things of what needs to happen. But we need more data on what on more action points on how these things and what needs to happen gets transformed physically on board, so that is more important. Again, you talked about hyperconnectivity, you talked about transformation. What is the A in the hat?
Yeah, the A stood for accountability. And that's just really how sustainability and the ethical consumer will drive a number of these decisions. We're seeing that transformation already. You can see it inside supply chains from a long time ago, where we started to realize we need to eliminate modern slavery. The Australian Border Force and our group and others are involved in that sort of process as well. And that sort of accountability, I think, is actually absolutely necessary to bring about change, because it puts pressure on people to realize that these things aren't just about money. They're not just about lowest costs. They're not just about we can destroy the environment and get away with it. The world is very much, and COVID has accelerated this, waking up to the fact that real change needs to occur. And I think that sort of accountability, as the A in HAT, it will actually happen. And I'm proud to see that there's been a huge movement towards this. It's not just isolated pockets. There's really starting to be a drumbeat for what real sustainability can look like.
Okay, so before I go to the audience questions, again, like I said, I've got so many things going on in my mind to ask you. I was wanting to ask you, so if you're saying that in the next few years, and you already showed us real time, how many thousands of geostats are already there, and how less expensive, how less costly things can be. Why is there, even today, why are there, I don't know whether you can answer this, but just to pick your mind on this, why is still there so many ships who do not have internets on board?
Yeah, I think there's a dynamic at play in terms of ownership and what owners see as valuable. And I think that metric is changing. I think when it comes to cost and costing something out, there's going to be a real cost put on things that are both ethical and sustainable. We're starting to see that real pushback from shareholders who say you can't just cut corners anymore. We want to see fundamental change. If you bring connectivity to something, it's sort of like shining a light in a dark place. If you give people connectivity, they can use their voice. And we've seen that all over the world, where the voices of a collective group of people have changed things. And we've seen over COVID that the vaccine push for seafarers, which has become international news. I've heard people down at the local talk about it. These sorts of things are becoming commonplace in people's consciousness. It wasn't the case 10 years ago. And as you increase connectivity, the H of hyperconnectivity, you'll naturally increase accountability. And again, that'll bring about transformational change. And I wanted to put it in that acronym HAT, because I was going to say to you, if it doesn't happen in the next 10 years, I'm going to eat my hat, which I think is a fair statement.
Okay. Yeah. Again. So the people are really engaging now, and I'll come back to you with the questions. Again, one more question on my mind is, I see you're a man of diverse skills, and you're into connectivity, you're into systems, you're into softwares, you're into satellite mapping, you're into so many things, and you are also into maritime. So, this is a question which I want to ask you, because in today's world, when we are talking about future skills and future employment opportunities, this is definitely a huge employment opportunity. How do the present day seafarers or maritime professionals acclimatize themselves and transform to the levels and the skills that you have? What is the way forward to being where you are?
Yeah, it's really good. I'm just really humbling you to say that. So thank you. It's been a privilege to have a diverse skill set and be exposed to practitioners all over the world who've trained me so well. So there's a lot of online learning that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. There's a lot of massive online learning courses and university courses, and also courses through a bunch of different private providers that can rapidly accelerate your knowledge. And what we're seeing now is a transference away from traditional institutions to things that are online driven. You can get certifications and courses. You can talk directly to professionals. You can reach out to them through mediums like LinkedIn. I use that very extensively. And I've found people so willing to help, to impart information, to give me wisdom, to guide my thoughts. And if people need to, they can reach out to us, and I'm sure you'll pass our information on, because we know some specific people who are really interested in that transition from ship to shore. They have a real passion for it, and making sure there is an ability for people who have been on board for a long time to upskill. But we see through groups like the Northeast Maritime Institute and the organisation that sits behind that, NEMO, we see onboard training coming to the fore as connectivity brings in the ability to train on board and train in place. And we'll fundamentally see a lot of that information and knowledge transference change. And what will be really exciting is it means that your time on the vessel won't just be about the vessel specifically in front of you. It could be about anything in the world. And I'm excited to think that seafarers would learn anything from becoming doctors or transitioning to aviation or any other skill that they might learn through these online courses. It's pretty exciting to think about that.
Great, Jonathan. Okay, now I'll give the chance to the platform guys. Otherwise, they'll think I'm the only one who's asking questions. So we've got a question from a seafarer, and very, very interesting question. He says, how do these geostats prevent collision against each other?
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, they're catapulted into the correct orbits. There are some near misses. There's been a few occasions where they've actually run into each other, which becomes a real big problem. Just to illustrate how that can become problematic, I'll just quickly reshare my screen, and I'll turn on this little thing over here. I'll turn these guys off. I'll turn on this debris. You see that?
Wow.
All those little,
what's that?
Reload, all those little pink dots is debris in a debris field that sits around the Earth. You can't just put your satellite up there. You have to be conscious of things that hit into each other and cause collisions of little chunks.
You mean to say if they collide, then the debris falls into the Earth, right?
Yeah, sometimes it gets drawn back into the Earth, which is great because it can burn up and disappear. Sometimes it drifts in that same layer. Sometimes it drifts out into space.
You mean to say as if being struck by lightning was not enough? No, we need to be wary of
you could get hit by a satellite. I mean, one just fell out of the sky. It was a different satellite. I won't name where it came from, but one just fell out of the sky a couple of months ago. So yeah, watch out for that.
My God. Wow. That's really scary. Okay. I have another question from Leroy Dias, and he's speaking to you from Steel Core, Dubai. And he has asked, Jonathan, do you think influences from bodies like SOLAS and IMO, etc., help to accelerate the transformation? What does the industry at large need to do to push this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer to that is yes, because they can increase awareness across a very broad group of people. I think what we find is that technology is rapidly evolving. Like the phone that you've got in your pocket didn't really exist 15 years ago, and definitely not in the current guise that it has with all the apps that have got on it, all the notifications you get. Things change that fast. So if AIS, for instance, is 20 or so years old, or even older than that, and we've got a technology that's coming in to replace it, and that technology gets ushered into the environment within a 10-year lifespan, then if regulation takes 10 years to start thinking about whether these things will change, by the time it's come to full fruition, as in we agree this will change, we'll be 10 years behind. And in that 10 years of great compression in the technological landscape, a new thing will come out, which will be even more transformational. So when we see things like the low Earth orbit satellite layer, we're looking at things that happen rapidly. And so what we would like to encourage organizations like the IMO and others is to just consider how these new technologies can be transformational and start small scale pilots that are relatively inexpensive, that can be transformational very quickly, and then scale up as they see benefit with those small scale pilots. And I think gone are the days where we need to sit on these things for 10 or 15 years to work out if they're going to be useful to us. We need to actually start going out there and experimenting, trying new things and seeing if they work. And as they work in partnership with industries, commercial operators, we can start rolling them out to great effect.
Great. So we have question. We have, we unfortunately, we've got a time-bound schedule and we're running back-to-back schedule. There's one, I think we only time for only one last question, and that also has come from a sailor. He's divided the question into two parts. The second part, I read out the second part, which I don't think anybody in the world can answer, and I don't expect you to answer that. So it says, can't it be made mandatory for the international governing bodies to provide internet connectivity on boat ships across all owners? So I don't think anybody can answer that. But the first part of his question is very interesting, very important. And this is exactly what I wanted to ask you myself also. He says, how effective will these be in collision avoidance on boat ships?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Just to try and answer your second question. Is it possible? Yes, it actually is possible. If we can roll out a global vaccine in a short period of time, we can develop it and then roll it out. We lack the political willpower or the appetite to roll these sorts of things out. I've seen a bunch of different advocacy groups say that things like connectivity will become a human right, much like food or water or other provisions are. And I think that's, that might be a bit extreme, but I think there's some validity to that. So just the thought for that second question. The first one in terms of collision avoidance, I absolutely see the LEO, MEO and GEO layers playing a much greater role in ensuring that collision avoidance doesn't happen. If you've got something at the LEO layer, so lower down, that can see things with very high degree of imaging potential, then you don't have to just rely on AAS or anything that was traditional, which has done a fantastic job to date to eliminate collisions. You can actually augment or add additional data points to reduce the chance of collisions. So I absolutely see that happening. It won't just rely on one ship doing the right thing. There'll actually be a number of different things you can use and will be made available to a lot of different seafaring folk, which will help those things not come to pass.
Jonathan, we are already 5 minutes into the networking time. We should give people time for coffee. But anyway, Jonathan, I've told you this before. I'm going to tell you this publicly in front of everybody. You're a rock star. I mean, you bring in that much of energy and excitement and so much of engagement. And your energy, it motivates us that people like you are working behind the scenes 24/7 in order to make life easier on both ships and solve global problems. So thank you, Jonathan, for your time and engagement. We would love to, have you the whole day, but I would. This is just the beginning of a relationship, and I would. We deal with a lot of seafarers, and I'll come back to you with questions, and maybe we can have a one-on-one session next time. As part of the sealing campaign. So Jonathan, thanks for joining TIM conference and be with us whole day. Make some time to visit the booth while you are coming back from the other door. And so excellent. Thanks a lot. Well, thanks a lot. Yes.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It's a real privilege. I'm just humbled to be here. So thank you so much.
Thanks, and namaskar from India and TIM Conference Live.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.